a seasoned professional in the field of technology and its impact on society, currently serving as Associate Professor of Computer Information Technology at California Baptist University, where he combines his passion for teaching with cutting-edge research. Our very welcome guest today is Dr. Brian S. Bovee. With over 2 decades of experience, Dr. Bovee has been instrumental in shaping how digital tools engage users. His research interests focus on the intersection of technology and human behavior, with a particular emphasis on the important topic of the impact of smartphones and other digital devices on our daily lives. He's recently authored an excellent book titled The Focus Faith, which explores the concept of reclaiming attention from screens and the attention economy. This work reflects his ongoing commitment to understanding and addressing the challenges posed by an increasingly digital world. So you're very welcome. I think you've picked a very relevant topic to be passionate about, but one that is changing so quickly. So one I'm sure that keeps you on your toes all the time. But I wanted just to go back a little bit and explore your formative years. So what helped in your sort of growing up, your first sort of few decades? What helped create the person that you are today?
Well, first of all, Andrew, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's wonderful to be able to have this discussion with you on this important topic. I was, I think probably the biggest influence for me was that I was raised by solid parents, who poured into me, and I didn't have the temptations that kids today have as far as the devices. I was left to explore a lot of things on my own and develop a focus. But probably the biggest influence in my life was and continues to be is my faith. It helps drive everything I do, and I really believe it's in Jesus' words, it's the abundant life. So that's kind of, we'll get into this, but that was a big reason why I wrote the book. I think that a lot of people are missing out because of the technologies taking away. I think we all know intuitively these technologies aren't what we want to think back on our deathbed, and as having lived the abundant life. And so that was a big factor.
That's really interesting. One of the things I often think is, or say to people, is if you have a party that's sort of celebrating your 80th birthday, 90th birthday, what do you want people to say about you? What do you want them to have talked about? And I don't think it's that, Brian is such a great guy. He spent so much time on his phone. He really knew his way around social media. He was so good in that sort of stuff. You wanted to be saying, I think, Brian was traveled around. He's met so many people. He's shared his interests. He's educated hundreds of people. It's something that's, yeah. And I think I certainly, when I was growing up, there were no smartphones. There were we didn't have laptops. There was no social media. Yes, to people listening, that time did exist. And a lot of time we spent, as I spent as a child, was just outside, getting up to, light mischief and doing silly things, climbing trees too high and wading through rivers too deep and things. But it wasn't with somebody recording everything I did, thankfully. So none of those things are going to come to light. So from that sort of background of exploration, of being interested, really, being curious. So what led you to the field of technology? What was the fascination for you when you first started?
Well, I've always kind of been a little bit of a nerd. As a kid, I was the kid when the games came out. I'm thinking about Atari and things like that. My parents definitely had to put the restrictions on how much time I spent on those, and I've always had this fascination with technology. And but as I got older, I started to get really interested, and I thought I wanted to teach at the college level. That was always the goal. And it was interesting when I went to grad school, this thing called the internet became, started taking over the world. And I remember I went to get my ID at the university I was going to start grad school in, and they took a picture of me, and they were able to drop it into a computer instantly. And I remember that moment just sort of blew my mind. Because this is before that was even possible, right on the cutting edge there. And so I decided, and I knew they had a program called instructional technology. Mm-hmm. So it kind of combined my passion for developing better instruction or becoming a college educator with technology. So I ended up getting my first master's in that. And we did a lot of courses in the very first phases of the internet when we were, typing on terminals to people in other countries. And then from there, after I graduated, I got a job in the tech world, and I was there for 23 years. So I thought that my life was going to take a turn where I wasn't going to end up teaching. And little did I know that after 23 years, I was able to get back into it, and I ended up getting another master's and my doctorate in information systems, and now I get to kind of combine my two loves of both technology and teaching.
When you, it's an interesting time ago. So when you first encountered the internet, this thing that could connect people, and it was originally used for academic purposes and things. Did you have any concept of what it would become? Do you think the people that developed it had a concept of that it would be all pervasive through everything that we do?
Oh no, no, I don't think anybody did. It was just a tool that we could use to communicate,
Mm.
a step above a telephone call. We could communicate through similar to what we have now in chat. That was kind of how it started with ARPANET, and developed by the military,
Yeah.
and I don't think there was any idea of the impact that I know the developers had no idea the impact that it's having on our world today. So we've definitely seen tremendous change over the years.
Yeah, if they somehow cut a deal that gave them a cent for every minute spent on the internet, we'd have some trillionaires around right now, I think. But yeah, yeah. So is there a conflict at all? So you teach computing information technology. You're talking about the latest technological advances. You're explaining the real sort of cutting edge of technology with the discussion and thoughts you have around the potential negative impacts that some of the technology can enable on society. Do the two conflict at all, or do they come in harmony?
I would say, yeah, they definitely do conflict. I think, kind of getting back to your last question too. I think for me, it's been a journey to learn how they conflict, and
Hmm.
as an educator, it's really important for me to teach my students that, because I think the ways that they conflict aren't readily apparent. I don't think we all recognize those. So when I started really getting the passion to write this book, it was way back in 2018. A guy by there was a book called the Shallows. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It
Yeah.
was a bestseller,
Hmm.
and it was the first really book that I've ever read. It may have been, I think it was kind of the groundbreaking book of that time, that began to show us that the internet is literally rewiring our brains. He brings in all the science to show how our brains, or the plasticity of our brains, are being rewired.
Yeah.
So about this time, I used to love to read, and I still do, but I was recognizing that I was having a harder and harder time to focus. I would sit down to read a book, and I would get a few pages in, and I'd be wanting to do something else. My mind would go elsewhere, and before I could get lost in the book and be there for hours. And so he talks in his book, and this again was way before social media and everything, about how our brains are literally being rewired by the activity of being on the internet. And we're talking about hyperlinks and things like that draw us away and harder to stay focused on what we're reading. So that sort of began my journey to realize that um, there's something about this tool that could be having tinkering with my brain, and so I started really wanting to explore it myself, and then I was sharing what I was learning with my students over really the last 6 years. And it's really been only in the last couple of years that I've started to see people recognize that in our own lives. It finally feels like, yeah, there's other people that are sharing this message, this important message that, and we're seeing legislation and everything to help with this. That yes, this is having an effect on our brains, and in particular our kids and
Mm.
their brains. And what do we do about it?
Yeah. One of the things that I think I notice, or one of the things that concerns me, is that because our smartphones are amazing devices, we can't get away from it. They are amazing devices that allow us to connect with people across the world. We can search at any topic we want to, and it's there at our fingertips. we almost seem to be outsourcing quite a lot of what we used to do to our devices. And one perfect example of it would be directions.
Yeah.
So when I first went to London, we had a thing called an A to Z. So the city, every single street was printed out on a thing, and you found your way around doing that basically, and that's what you did. You could navigate to I could navigate to my parents' house, to my friend's house without any shadow of a doubt really. If I go out in the car with the children now, my children are 17 and 15 on Friday. I said, right, how would you get to Wimbledon from here? It's like 6 miles away. Oh, I don't know. And they wouldn't know how to get there, which I just find staggering. I always knew how to get to places that I could walk to, then I could ride to, then drive to, within a 30, 40 kilometer, 50 kilometer, 100 kilometer from the house. I know how to get there. Whereas now it's that straight away, put it in. And it's almost that sort of notion of, well, I don't need to know it because my phone does that, or
Right. Right.
which is it's true that the phone will do that, but that's not the same as saying you don't need to know it.
Hmm.
Because you just had a terrible disaster in California with no electricity, no internet. So what do people do? They can't leave their homes, have no idea where things are, where the nearest shop is, where the nearest store is, where the school is, all those things. I mean, overstating it, but sometimes you've got to realize that technology is not always going to be around to do it. Yeah, so that's my concern, is that because technology does many wonderful things, we outsource a lot of our knowledge to our phones, and
Yeah.
people don't know phone numbers anymore. You ask
That's
somebody to list their 5 best friends' phone numbers. I have no idea. It's in
yeah.
my phone.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. That's a perfect example. I've used it a lot myself because when I first started in the tech world, I was traveling every week,
Mhm.
getting on a plane, landing somewhere I didn't know. And I had the Thomas guide. Most people don't know what those are anymore, but
Yeah.
it was this massive book that helped me get from
Mhm.
one place to the other,
Mhm.
and payphones. And like you said, I feel pretty hopeless even myself without my GPS most days.
Yeah.
So I think what's interesting though is to think about, okay, so this has definitely had an effect on our brains, and um, in a way that we're less able to navigate. So when you think about, let's extend that out to current technologies and think
Mhm.
about something like artificial intelligence, and think about how is that what effect is that going to have on our brains in 5 years? Where are we going to be in terms of our ability to develop new ideas, to ask questions and critical thinking,
Mm.
to think through how to coherently develop an idea on a paper. All those are scary questions for me. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. Is that I just want people to start asking those questions themselves, because I think if they go unanswered, you know, we could be put ourselves in a lot of hurt. And
Mm.
I think it's not just we're really good at inventing new things, our society, but not
Yeah.
so good at questioning whether or not this is an overall good thing for us. So it's important that we ask these questions.
Yeah. Yes. And a lot of things aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily come out of your university or Harvard or Yale. It's sort of the measured and monitored and checked with the company. Individuals sort of sit there, and learn code, right, and then they suddenly reading today about a new AI that's come out of China, and you think, well, okay, it's the biggest downloaded app on Apple and Android this past
Mm-hmm.
week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much cheaper than typical AI, but you've no idea what the information and questions you're putting into that, or anybody else's AI are doing and where they're going to. And do you find, as an educator now, that when you're setting assignments, tasks, etc., I mean, AI can produce some pretty competent code now. It can produce
Mm-hmm.
some pretty competent answers. How do you both, I guess, communicate what it can do and the benefit it is as an aid, without students relying on it too heavily and not learning because AI is doing it for them?
Yeah, that's a conversation that's being held all around academia, and it's something that we every university has to come up with an answer for, and
Mm.
every professor has to come up with teacher has to come up with an answer for. And for me, I think it's really about help. At the college level, I can ask my students to consider how that's affecting their own education. If they're really,
Mhm.
they're paying a lot of money to get this education. So I emphasize to
Mm.
them, there's a lot of things I can do to mitigate it, but ultimately they're going to use that tool um, if they want to. And so the question is, you paid to get here, so you're going to lose the opportunity by just having us do the thinking for you. Um, but on the flip side of that, like you said, there's in the tech world when we're talking about coding and things like that, uh, the industry is actually demanding that we are creating graduates that are proficient with how to use the tool.
Mhm.
So it's a balancing act because certainly this thing is incredibly valuable, but so it's a balancing act between trying to leverage the powerful uses of it against the negatives of having it do the thinking for our students.
I think that's definitely it. I think it is the fact of it being a tool and an aid to what we're doing. And you read a lot about AI will replace 500,000 jobs or et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we're sort of miss is that I think AI is very, very good for certain roles and for repetitive tasks and for lots of different things. Can do wonderful things, but at the moment it still needs incredibly intelligent humans to create the right prompts and all those things. So things do develop. And when I started work, there was I used to work at a big department store, and we had a 40 person, and it was all ladies, typing pool. You'd write a letter on a piece of paper, something called carbon paper. You wrote it and you had two copies of it. You gave one copy to the typing pool, and you got it about 3 days later, and then you were going to post it. Guess what? They aren't there anymore. They're doing something else. But they didn't suddenly disappear. But that 40-person type group, what, really? Somebody would type your letters? That's how it was. And I'm sure in 50 years' time, we'll look back and it'll be, really? Somebody really had to sort of tell AI what to do? Yeah, so things will develop. But I think knowing how to use it as a tool, I think, is the key thing that we can teach people and teach
Yeah.
my children and other children. So when you sort of start to create the book, and you were looking at sort of smartphones, how did you find that? Or what did you find were the most significant ways in which smartphones have changed the way we behave and how we interact as people?
Yeah.
That's a big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think um, the smartphone is an incredibly valuable piece of technology. I mean, it's an amazing tool that gives us the ability to connect with people that we would otherwise not be able to. For example, with social media, I absolutely love the updates from my grandkids and connections that I have with it. I don't use social media a lot, but I get it through my wife, through other people that I'd lose contact with, and just we could go on and on about the many great things about this tool. But I think not just the smartphone, but technology in general has these effects on our lives that we need to become aware of. And in the book, I bring out really three main areas. We could talk about each of them in a little more detail, but there's three main areas, and there's many more that we could explore. But the three main areas that I've seen how it's affected me, and the research seems to support it, is in our ability to read, um, spend time alone, and for people of faith to pray. So it's for example, and with reading, this goes along with the topics in your show so well. There's a real clear link between um, our smartphones and a decline in reading. And the part that is interesting to me and how it relates to your show is that there's also a lot of research to show from the University of Toronto that um, our lack of reading is having an effect on our empathy levels, our ability to empathize with other people. And when we read a book and we get lost in that story, we can put ourselves into their world. And more, especially young people, are having an incredibly difficult time to focus and read. I just read a news article recently. This wasn't in my book, but I just read a news article recently about Generation Alpha and some of the people, educators that were teaching these fourth graders, and they were talking about how for that generation, the reading level is at the lowest since 2005. And one of the teachers in the news article gave the example of how he can give his students a physical book opened up but turned backwards and away from them. And many of those students don't know what to do with it. They don't understand they need to turn it around and flip it to the front to begin reading. So there's we're starting these kids off at such an early age with the screens that
Yeah.
they're losing this connection to reading. And so that's one of the biggest areas. But then solitude is another one. We there's a popular author, you've probably heard of him, Cal Newport. He's written a bunch of books on deep work and digital
Yeah.
minimalism, and he's coined a term called solitude deprivation, which is basically we today, it was the first time really in the history of the world that we are virtually never alone. If we have our phones with us, we're still getting input from the world, and that is having a tremendous effect on our ability to um, process thoughts internally, kind of figure out where we are in the world, what our next steps are, and all those valuable things that happen when we're alone. There's a really interesting study that was done, and I talk about this in the book, about how far people will go to be alone. They put all these college students in a classroom, and they expose them to different stimuli, visual and auditory stimuli, and then they gave them a mild electric shock. And they asked the students, they said, could we pay you to continue to get more shocks? And the vast majority said no. But then they said, okay, we're going to leave you alone in this room with your thoughts for about 15 minutes. So they did that. They left them alone. They said, but if you want, you can always give yourself a shock. And the stats were pretty amazing on what happened. This is the crazy part. There was, I'm going to look it up just to be sure, but I think it was two-thirds of the men and 1/3 of the women gave themselves an electric shock after, saying they would pay not to be shocked while they were sitting there alone. So I just think, and I guess one guy shocked himself like 119 times. so I think, there's a lot that we could talk about in terms of how our smartphones and our technologies have impacted our ability to focus and the effects that has on things. But those three are big ones for me.
I quote that study from your book so many times on the podcast. So if you listen to any other ones and you hear that quoted, then that's where it came from. Yeah, and I am. It's funny. I was talking to my wife the other day, and she was saying that when she likes to, I'm trying to know how she put it. She likes to be alone or doing solitary activities, but with other people around. And I think that's whereas for me, I want to go and. So thankfully, we have a couple of family rooms. So I want to go and get the book, leave my phone, everything else behind, go and sit in the front room, just literally me in a chair and the book. That's it. That's my, and I love that. And my favorite thing at school, thankfully, and I thank so much that this was the case, that I loved reading, absolutely. And I feel for people that don't get the chance to go off to outer space, the depths of sea, the most congested city in the world, whatever, place you're never going to go to in a book. And I'm like you, I can sort of pick it up, and if it's written well, sort of really feel myself in the middle of Tokyo, sort of watch this other person eating their soup or whatever. It's just fascinating, but you don't get that on the phone. But no, I totally agree that people do find it hard to spend time alone, whether it's when I go outside, and typically it's mums. I see mums pushing a pushchair with a smartphone in their hand, and the child in the pushchair with an iPad or a tablet or whatever. And I think and there's a lot of evidence that shows people or young children sort of copy what they see. I think one of the biggest indicators for future academic success is the number of books in a house. So if children, that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever, if their parents are saying you should get off that phone, while they're literally on their own phone, the child's thinking, well, what? You're not sat there reading it. When's the last time you read a book? So I do think we have to model the behavior we want to see in our children.
Yeah, that was actually one of the major things that started me down this path was my own struggle with this. And I think it's as we learn more about things like the attention economy and how there really is some of the brightest minds and billions of dollars being poured into keeping us on our devices,
Yeah.
um, we we become more dedicated to stay off them. But the experience that I was thinking about was, and I'm saying this because I can relate with the moms that are in that situation. You
Mm.
know, you just need a break sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's easy to let that go a little too far. We had volunteered to watch our grandkids for the weekend, and by the end of the weekend, I was exhausted, and my grandson was started in playing with some Legos, and I sat in a chair and pulled out my phone, and I was starting into the news feeds, and I could hear him saying something to me, I think, but I was just out. I was just reading my news, and then finally, he kind of was able to break through this coma that I was in. He says, "Grandpa, put down your phone." And it was at that moment that I realized, okay, this is a big deal that I need to,
Yeah.
continue to work on in my own life. So, you know, it's not something that we can get away from. We're always around it, and I continue to struggle with. For me, like I said, news is, I don't know why it's just the thing I always go to. Other
Same.
people, more it's like social media or whatever. But we need to be aware of what are those things in our lives that are keeping us from what I call the abundant life. What are those things that are keeping us from having that and experiencing that with God and those around us? And so yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for for the moms and all the many people that need that break once in a while. But
Yeah, absolutely. And none of this is meant to be a criticism of anybody else, because exactly the same. And my son wants to use TikTok, so I thought, okay, I'll download it onto my phone, just see what it's like. And it was it wasn't so much the content of what was on there, as in the actual mini clips themselves, whatever. It was just the fact that I went on it, and then it was 2 hours later, and I have no idea where that time. It literally was just, oh, that's a
yeah,
funny football. That's and that was the thing. So I had to delete it. I had to go cut that. I can't. No, you can't have it. I can't have it, because
mm-hmm.
it just sucks your time, really. And
Mm-hmm.
all those mini clips, they're all, like I say, it's all about trying to keep you on the device, keep you on that site, keep the advertising dollars rolling in. None of these social media companies are a charity. They are all they're all focused on your attention. Most of the people that are senior in big social media companies don't let their own children have devices, which is quite ironic, I think.
Yeah,
There was a film a few years ago. Oh, it was either called Social Impact or
social
something. Social
social
Dilemma. That was it. Yeah, and yeah. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. Some of it is a bit basic, but the basic premise is that you invented this stuff. It's like, yeah, I'd never let my kids on it.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's many dopamine hits that you get in for likes or whatever else. They're fairly addictive. So how do we help? How do we as adults maintain a healthy relationship with technology, and then how do we pass that need on to our children?
Well, I think there's both we could think about in terms of offense and defense.
Mhm.
I think in terms of defense, those are sort of the more obvious techniques that we're familiar with. Things like um, changing your phone so that the apps that you use most often are a little more hidden, or not using your phone as much, reducing the number of notifications you get. In the book, I talk a lot about a digital detox, and we can talk more about that in a minute, and the value of
Mhm.
doing a digital detox. But all those ways that we can sort of, you talked a minute ago about how TikTok was, so easy to stay on.
Mm.
It's what we call a low friction app,
Mhm.
meaning that there's very little friction between you and the content. And they design it that way. Infinite scroll and things like that are techniques that the attention economy is designed to do to keep you on your device. So, but we can do the opposite. We can add friction as well, and that's what some of those techniques are. Is ways that we can make it harder on ourselves to slip into the habits that we don't want to go back to. Some people had a lot of success with deleting their social media from their phone and putting it onto their setting up their rules where they access it from their computer. So there's all kinds of ways that we can, once we recognize the situation, add more friction to stop us from going back to those old habits. And that's all what I would call the defensive side. But on the offensive side, we don't hear a lot about developing our attention, and I think that's really important. We know that we think about how we can reduce the need for these distractions, and um, in my dissertation and a lot of the research I've done recently, I did it on a psychological theory called flow theory. And that's basically, we've all experienced flow, and most people may have heard of the theory, but it's just the idea that when you are totally focused on a particular task, you lose track of time, and you're just, and it's something you enjoy doing. And there's just a very clear objective about what you want to do. And the example I like to give is, when I was writing this book, is I was in the Sierra Nevadas, and the fishing up there is some of the best in the world. And I would go down there, and I'd be down there for hours, not thinking about eating or anything, because every cast something was happening with my bobber, and I was pulling in a fish every 5 or 10 minutes, and it was just, you don't see people down there needing to look at their phone.
No.
We're all very focused on what we're doing. And so on the offensive side, it's really finding out what are those things that you need to reconnect with in your life. What are those things that, whether it's reading a book, or maybe it's doing some sort of activity like woodwork, or even things that you loved to do around the house that you've kind of lost the desire to do, or kind of fell off the radar. What are those things that you need to reconnect with? And I've got a list of questions that I could share with you too. But hobbies that you had in the past, or tasks that gave you a sense of purpose. Think those kinds of things that you felt a real calm clarity while you were doing it. So reconnecting with those things was really important in developing our focus, because once we're in that state, again, we're not going to need to look at our devices as much. And but then, so also in the book, I talk about how that's what we call focused attention. We can also recapture and develop our attention by two other kinds of attention. That's rote attention and boredom. We don't get bored anymore. And
No,
so,
I was literally just thinking that we don't.
yeah,
I used to, when we had our 6-7 week summer holiday, Mum said, I'm so bored. She said, well, go out and do something. Go out and do this, do that. But I think sometimes it's all right to be bored, really. You're obviously not bored, but it's all right not to have something that you think you're doing. Because when you're on a smartphone, you're not actually doing anything. Something's distracting you. Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's so much research now that's just showing that our brain needs that time. It needs that time to reconnect and make connections that you hadn't thought of before. And how many times have we been in the shower and just, it all comes to us, because there's nothing else happening. And the third type of attention is rote attention, and that's the same kind of idea. When you're doing the dishes or you're driving in a car, we don't need to have the radio or a podcast on all the time. Sometimes we need those quiet moments just to kind of reconnect with our world and where we want to go and where we've been. So those are getting back to your first question. I think we tend to really focus on the defensive side so much, but what I try to bring out in the book is that we can do a lot with the offensive side and developing our focus more.
It's funny, but a lot of things you said then. So when we had the pandemics over here, children couldn't go to school, we couldn't go to work, we're all at home all the time. So I started. I'm not sure I'd be brave enough to call it painting and sculpting, but I started daubing on canvases and bits of wood, whatever, with paint, and I started sculpting things. I made my wife a sculpture for Christmas, and I think one of the big differences between that in terms of attention or flow state was at the end of it, there's something.
Yeah.
Whether or not you think, that's not very good, it's something happened from these raw materials, and there's a bit of clay that's been dug out of the earth, and you've played around with it and painted it and glazed it, whatever, and something exists. And I really, we're going to run out of walls, I think. And my wife's always kind of say, yes, lovely. But it's just nice to create something, and it's a similar with reading, because with reading you're not really creating anything. When you're just creating different connections in your brain, different sort of levels of knowledge, I think. So I totally agree with the whole, all the things that you might want to have done that you don't do anymore. And I was told by my art teacher I wasn't good at art, so I stopped doing it. And now I sort of don't care. It just
Mhm.
feels very different. So you mentioned before about having a digital detox, and I guess it's relatively self-explanatory. But how do you define a digital detox?
Well, I think to define it, it's basically a time frame in which we separate ourselves from our digital technologies for the
Mhm.
purpose of reconnecting with our friends, family, and the things we love. And if you've ever done one, I've had the times that I did them in the past. They were pretty miserable experiences. I decided I need to get away from my phone for 3 4 days or whatever, and during that time I had all this extra time, and it just felt horrible. It's just,
Yeah.
what do I do with all this extra time? And I'd come back, and the research actually shows that they it can definitely make an impact on depression levels and stuff like that. But there's really little to show in terms of long-term positive
Mhm.
effects, because people do them for different reasons and for different lengths, and so there's a lot of variables in the research. But um, I think that the key to a detox is starting small. 24 hours is a good place to start. And then what I really try to bring out in the book is that, getting back to what we just discussed, is before you start one, to think about what are those things that you're going to use to fill that time. What are you going to use to, when you don't have your device, what are you going to pour yourself into? And my experience has been, at the end of a successful detox, people never want to go back to the phone and some of those things that were drawing their time away. They want to reconnect with those things that they love. So really, it's just a process of, and I talk all about the details in the book about how you can plan for it. Making sure you don't give yourself excuses why you need to get back to your phone, printing out the maps and things like that you might need, and then implementing it, pursuing those tasks that give you joy, and then and at the end, and follow when you're done with it, making sure you're adding friction. Once you've identified these are the things I want to reduce in my life, what are you going to do to add friction to make it harder on yourself to slip back to those same old
Mm.
habits?
Yeah, when I followed the guidance in the book, and I did it, and I still do it now, and it's changed my approach to how I use my phone. Really, I think one of the things that surprised me, maybe will surprise other people, maybe not, was how much time I suddenly had.
Mm.
And when we've always had, there's 24 hours in the day. We can't do anything about that. We can't make time. We can't create time. If we could, it'd be wonderful, but we can't. And how you choose to use them, it's it's that like I say, it's that time where you're not actively doing things on your phone. You're not doing a crossword or a Sudoku or the Wordle puzzle or whatever. You're just on the phone, and an hour's gone, 2 hours gone, 3 hours gone, and that's time's gone then. Basically, I found it
Mm.
was like, oh gosh, I can put 3 hours into this painting now. I can read for 3 hours, or I can do whatever. And it was the amount of time. But I think one thing that you just say in the book, you've said now, it is important to plan. Otherwise, you do it and think, oh, that was just horrible. I just had all this time. Just shows me how empty my life is. You've got to
Yeah.
think about what are the things you want to do, and it can be. For me, we've got a lovely little dog, and going out for a walk with her for an hour without earphones in, without anything else, just the two of us walking. That's when my ideas come. They don't come when I'm on the phone because I'm distracted. Not that
Mhm.
it's funny, isn't it? Because it's not that it's a really active distraction. It just starts with it's just numbing. I think phones and social media is numbing in a way. Just stops you thinking about anything else. And one of the things you said, in which I think we agree on, is a smartphone allows us to connect. You're in California, I'm in London, and we're talking. You're on your phone. We're talking very easily, which is wonderful. But I do think, in a way, and research supports this, that more people will define themselves as lonely. People are starting physical relationships later in life. They find it hard to meet friends and partners. I think, although we have the ability to connect with anybody, anywhere, it almost seems to come at the cost of our ability to connect with people in person. Is that something that the research finds, or is it something you believe?
Yeah, for sure. We're more connected and less connected at the same
Yeah.
time to the people in the world around us. We've especially, you see this with the teens. They've got such a focus on the number of friends that they have with their social media, and to the point where it becomes difficult to develop the time to have deep friendships,
Mm.
and outside the social media world. The research for teens and social media has been, it's well established, as far as depression
Yeah.
um, and the amount of time that they're on their phones. Something TikTok has just supposedly been banned here in the U.S., but that app alone, they're on their phone up to 7 hours a day. The research says is as high as 7 hours a day. So it makes it difficult to connect with um, those around us in a deeper level when you're constantly looking at the device.
It does. I mean, I know we people are incredibly educated these days. More people have the chance to go to college than ever before. More people get degrees than ever before. But I think one of the most important measures of, these are the wrong words, but ability, talent, integration is, if I ever interview somebody for a role and they're just at university, or if my children meet our 8-year-old neighbors or whatever, just can they have a conversation? Can somebody come in and talk to me as somebody that's, their parents' age? Can they talk to somebody that's their great grandparents' age? Can they talk to somebody that's 10 years younger than them? Can they just have a conversation? And we
Mm-hmm.
all should be able to have a polite conversation, but I think we do find when we interview young people, particularly, they find it more challenging than they should in terms of just holding just a conversation, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of looking you in the eye and having a discussion, and being able to being comfortable debating different points and things. It does make things quite difficult, I think, when that's their main point of interaction. Do you,
Mm-hmm.
so? And you talked before about the three things, and the final one of them was prayer. And so, do you find that prayer helps still our minds? It helps bring us confidence. Or what do you think the role of prayer is in helping this?
For me, it's my lifeline in terms of charting my direction. In the opening of my book, I give an example that might be helpful to kind of to answer your question. In the opening of my book, I talk about an example of picturing yourself as a traveler and getting to a destination in a different country you've never been to, getting to your car and realizing that you don't have a cell phone that's working, it's dead, and there's nothing to charge it with. And so you decide, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to um, try to make my way to my hotel without my phone. I'm just going to navigate my way there. And if you've ever done that, it doesn't usually go very well. And
No.
as you're driving, you just get terribly confused and stressed, and it just feels like you're responding to whatever the next turn is. And um, that's the example that I give in terms of our lives without our focus, and specifically without our prayer. Without prayer, if we don't have that kind of connection, if I don't have that kind of connection to God, I really believe that's where my direction comes from. And in terms of how I live my life, and if I don't have that, I'm just that lost traveler bouncing around, and so it the phone has definitely affected my ability to have a good prayer life, and I talk about that in the book. But
Mhm.
um, even outside of prayer, I think our devices can make us that traveler. They can turn us into that person who's literally just bouncing from one thing to the next, and there's no real direction or goal or plan or focus on what I want out of life. What's the ultimate goal? What is the abundant life for me? And so my probably the biggest goal I had when I wrote this book is that I would get people to rediscover the abundant life, specifically in their prayer life and in the spiritual disciplines of solitude and reading scripture.
Mhm.
But then outside of that, even just rediscovering those things that like you discovered, like painting and sculpture and those kinds of things that maybe have we've forgotten about because of the distractions that we have on our phone. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Yeah, that's a good answer. And I think prayer and that connection and that thought, it all comes from the point for me is that I think we were all individually put here for a purpose. The odds on Brian being born, myself being born, they're pretty limited. There's millions of sperm, there's one egg. This is like it's a crazy mathematical infinite odds are against us ever being conceived and being born. So if it's gone to all that trouble, then we're here for a purpose and for a reason. I don't think it's a spend time on my phone. And I think with prayer and with connection, you don't need an app. You don't need your phone to be charged. You don't need a power bank, whatever. It's just a conversation. And I think if you believe whatever your particular beliefs are, if you have a belief that there is more to it than what we're literally doing day to day, and you're aiming for that life that is lived in an abundant manner. And we do want to be able to look back when we're 90 and say, gosh, yeah, that guy, he sort of traveled a lot, but he knew where he was going. And he did this and did that, or she did this and she did that, as opposed to, yeah, not having made any ripples in the world, which I think would be a shame, really.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, it's almost an impossible question to answer, I think, but do you have a view as to what the next 5 to 10 years might bring in terms of how we use technology? Do you think there'll be a technology, not so much backlash, but there'll be
Mm-hmm.
more understanding, legislation, things will change, or things will just keep getting more and more and more connected?
Well, I think obviously the default answer is artificial intelligence is changing our world.
Mhm.
But I just recently read an article that I thought was interesting that it compared the attention economy to a new term called the intention economy. And it's, I go into my book in a ton of detail about how the attention economy and specifically big tech, the methods that they use to keep us addictive, like buttons and
Mhm.
notifications, infinite scroll algorithms, all those kinds of things. But this article was talking about how in the future we're moving towards a day with all these bots that get to know us really well, and kind of what our likes are, what our who we are as a person, and to the point where it's almost for some people it's a companion. That we're getting to
Yeah.
that kind of level that they will be able to predict our intentions, to be able to predict what we're going to do in the future. So there's all kinds of ethical things that come out of that in terms of who you're going to vote for and what kind of hotel you're going to purchase. So in terms of topics closely related to this book, I think that's where we're headed. We're headed to this new level of the attention economy where we can not only predict behavior based on what you've done on your phone and kind of the sites you visited and basic information about who you
Yeah.
are, but we can get a lot more detail, a lot more color out of who you are as a person and what you're going to do in the future. And for in some ways that's a wonderful thing, to be able to have these apps suggest things I like. That's I
Yeah.
love that. I love having Netflix suggest my next movie, and just but there's a huge downside to that in terms of how um, that information is going to be used, and also in terms of how much these companies are going to be dedicated to keep us engaged so they can get that information. That's really what this book's all about,
Mm.
is how and AI is going to continue to do that even more as that as the dollars become more realized, as they realize that we can get a lot more uh, value out of our advertising dollars by pushing that into AI and getting them and predicting what Brian Bovee is going to do.
Mm.
So that's definitely one thing I've been watching a lot of. And a second thing I think is interesting to me, and we're going to hear more and more about, is quantum computing. And I think
Mhm.
that's not so much in this related to this topic, but it's definitely going to be the next AI thing. I think we talk about is how those kinds of powerful computers are going to change the world, especially in terms of cybersecurity, things like that.
Yes.
We really need to. It's one of those, like I said earlier, we're really good at inventing new things, but not so good at deciding whether we're ready for it. And I'm not quite so sure we're going to be ready for these quantum computers when it comes to being able to handle cybersecurity concerns and things like that.
Yeah, I still struggle a little bit with the concept that a qubit can be in two states at the same time. It's a bit. I mean, I always loved is the wrong word. The sort of Schrodinger's cat sort of an analogy about, well, it's you don't know it's you don't know what state it's in until you go and look at that state, and that's yeah. So once they get past that state, I think I think it's another one of those cases where, hey, we've invented this incredible thing. Right, now what are we going to do with it? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I can't remember who quoted it, but there's the quote goes, "Technology is the answer." Now, what's the question? So we always come up with that technology is the solution, and we don't spend enough time figuring out, well, what question are we actually answering with this? And I think that just explains so much that we are often in a hurry to get to the answer, because the answer is the cool bit and it's the fun bit and it's the exciting bit, and spend too little time thinking about what question we're actually trying to address here. And then maybe think of a different way to do it. But I always think that's a interesting way to look at it. And you look at some of the sort of films or books that sort of look at the future, and a bit like you said about being able to predict somebody's behavior. And I think if you get somebody's phone habits for a day, you can pretty much know what sort of person they are. But do you get to the stage where you can predict at 13 whether somebody's going to be a criminal or not? And then if you can predict that with 99% accuracy, do you preempt that, and do you put them in prison preemptively to stop crime happening? So I think there are those ethical considerations that, okay, we know all this about a person. What do we then do with that information? That's the difficult thing, I think. Yeah. So you've got the answer, you've got the solution, and it's okay. Right. What do we do with it though? Do we act preemptively on the information that we have about somebody because we believe, and we 99.9% certain, is that enough to assuade the 0.1% where we're going to get it wrong? Yeah. And I don't know who's looking at those questions, because when I see, I have a guilty pleasure of watching Congress and Senate hearings, and when I watch some of the Senate hearings, some of the Congress hearings, I'm not necessarily convinced that the people that are asking the questions necessarily know enough about technology to answer this. So I don't know who's looking at the ethics of AI and where the ethics comes into it. And is there a sort of AI ethics standard, or something that people work towards, or is it free for all?
It's pretty much free for all. I think there's a lot of good people that are working towards that. Tristan Harris, you're probably familiar with him. He's Center for Humane Society. Uh, uh, he's used to work for Google ethicist, and he's doing a lot of good work with his organization and raising awareness. And I think, kind of getting back to your question of where we're going to be in 5 years, I think I'm encouraged to see the work that he's doing, and a lot of the legislation that's coming down right now. Australia's recent laws about social media and
Yes.
teens. I think like I said, in 2018, when I started realizing that this thing was tinkering with my brain, I felt like I was the only one that was talking about this. And now it's we're all starting to recognize it. So I'm hopeful. I'm definitely hopeful that through podcasts like this and people, as we all kind of champion this as a cause that we need to continue to talk about, I think that, we'll get to a point where, and even the legislation with TikTok recently here in the U.S., we'll get to a point where we're just not going to allow it anymore. Tristan Harris talks a lot about, compares it to the tobacco industry and things like that, where people were knowingly doing harm. And I talk a lot about that in my book, how these developers, have expressed tremendous guilt over ripping apart the social fabric of society. And, Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, saying, we conspired to make this button as addictive as possible. And, so we recognize that these companies are intentionally doing this, and we're now to the point in society where, we're asking the question, what do we do now? We want to move forward in a new world. And so those are signs that give me a lot of hope.
And I think it's always more positive when people are talking about it. When people don't talk about it and there's no conversation being had, I do, every time I pick up the newspaper or go onto a news site, as my habits tend to be in the morning, there is a conversation happening about it. And even if it's we don't know what to do, at least the conversation is happening and the comments come in and people are thinking about whether it's the right thing to do. And people, youngsters now won't necessarily believe this, but in the late 40s, early 50s of the last century, medical doctors would advertise cigarettes. They would promote cigarettes as you have a bad cough, you have a smooth Luckies, have a Camel clears the throat better than anything else. So this wasn't that long ago. This was when the tobacco companies, as we know now from evidence, sort of knew these things were bad for you. But in the UK in the early 1950s, 80% of men smoked. I think we're now down to about a hardcore of about 11%, which is still too many, but it's extraordinary how those things have changed. And I think we'll perhaps, as you say, see it with this as it evolves and we find out the knowledge people had. But see, you spend a lot of time thinking about this, a lot of time teaching, so there's a lot of energy expended on the topic. How do you make sure you're feeling physically and mentally at the top of your game? How do you look after yourself so you're able to spend time on this?
Well, I do spend a lot of time in front of a computer. I think my it, the one thing that I think helps me most is my faith. I spend time. I make sure that I have time that I'm able to reconnect with myself and my God. Every morning there's protected time that I've set up habits in my life where I don't look at my device, other than what I use for scripture reading, things like that. And then and I also have times that that I personally love to get away each quarter. So each quarter I've set up a time in my life where I get away for ideally an overnight thing at the coast or in the mountains and spend time alone, to just reconnect and pray. And those times are invaluable to realize where I'm at and where I want to go in life and what God's teaching me. So certainly I think those periods of solitude are really important in answering your question, identifying and protecting those times of solitude. And then just the daily, habits of reclaiming time, whether it's on a morning run. That's really important to me. I love to get away from my computer for a while to run, spend time in nature. And that's really important. Like you with your walk, I think so many times I'll be on a run with nothing but the sound of my feet, hitting the trail, and just come to all kinds of new conclusions, and God reveals things to me if I'm just being open to hearing from Him.
Yeah.
So.
And the family and friends important to you?
Oh, for sure, yes. I mean that's it goes without saying. I'm incredibly blessed. I've been married almost 30 years. We're going to celebrate 30 years here coming up in June, and so my wife is my best friend and supporter, and then I'm blessed to have 3 kids and grandkids, and so we just, that's outside my faith. My family is my most valued thing.
Yeah, they're all the connections, aren't they? Connections to faith, connections to family, connections to friends. It's very different. And you never think about. And whenever I think about my family or friends, etc., the things that I think about are never things that have involved technology. Last year we went on holiday to France, the sort of 4 of us and the dog, and because where we were, we couldn't use our phones unless we were in a particular part of the house. So we walked and we swam on a big lake and we did lots of things. All things I can remember, all things we were just doing, and they might have been silly things. We're literally throwing a stone to see who can hit the can that's 20 yards away or whatever. Great, just things that people have done for centuries ago. These aren't super high tech things, but yeah, those are things that I remember. Really, those things that we did, as opposed to when I look around the room and all of us on our phones separately, I think, oh my goodness, this is not. We're together physically, but we're not together in any way, shape, or form. We're away with somebody else, which I think is difficult. So one of the challenges with your book is that you need to keep updating it. So, do you think there's another book going to come out of you in the next 5 or 10 years, or what do you think the future holds for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. This was definitely my passion project. I didn't ever really think about writing another book, and you're probably the first person that I've talked about. I think I don't know if I'll have the time to do it in the near future, but
Mhm.
I think what it seems like I'm hearing a real need for is the focused family. You know, it just
Yes.
this book is really focused on you as a person individually, primarily you as a person reconnecting with your faith and developing your own focus so that you can uh, have what I call what God gives us, the abundant life. But
Mm.
I think that there's every parent and is asking the same questions about how do I help my kid, and you know, I've raised three grown kids, and I've certainly learned a lot of lessons, and there's a lot of research that comes to bear that I think someday I hope to be able to share on that topic. You know, right now it's I've just kind of gotten back, sabbatical's over now, and I'm getting back into the routine of teaching
Yeah.
and doing research again. I love both. I love
Mm.
doing traditional research, and so it'll probably be a little while before I can really take that topic up seriously, and the world will be in a different place. So we'll see. We'll see if it
Yeah,
actually happens.
and the good thing is, like you said, there's lots of research is taking place on all of these topics now. We seem to see more research. Yes, a lot of people I talk to are sort of researchers and researching, and there's so many fascinating areas. Just sort of getting to a place where it can be used and it can make things happen and make decisions change. But I do 100% think that sort of focused family and how to be a family really.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
a lot of families struggle for lots of different reasons, whether it's economic or whatever. And I do think there's a lot to be explored. But I think by the time you get to write that, there'd be lots more research to add to it. So I think that'd be a nice connection. But I'm not trying to put pressure on you to do it now. It's have your life back for a little while.
Yeah.
Enjoy the time. But yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end. I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting, and I'll put all the links to the book and everything into the show notes. It's a really informative but not judgmental book. And that's what I liked about it. The book shows curiosity and it encourages curiosity. And I think curiosity is one of those great words. And what is it? Was it Walt Whitman? Sort of be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's absolutely what the book is. And I think what people should be is be curious. And the more we're curious, the more we explore, the more we don't take what everybody else says for granted. We just learn for ourselves. That's what we should be doing. That's what I think your book and what you teach encourages. So, no, thank you for what you're doing, and thank you so much for finding the time to do this. I know
Thank
the last
you.
few weeks have been, particularly difficult, but I do appreciate you, sticking with me and giving me the time.
Yeah. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.